Good. We're based, Nativa's based here in Richmond, and it's great to be here to speak to all of you today. Thank you for all of your interest in taking care of the environment. Because if we don't take care of it, if we individually don't choose to do that, what's going to happen to the planet if we don't take, we got to step it up. So we're going to talk today about the solution under our feet, how regenerative agriculture can save our planet. And not only can it help reverse climate change, but it also can drought-proof our soils so we can be a better situation for our lands and soils to deal with drought. And it also can reduce the amount of chemicals that are flowing into the oceans. Does anyone have any idea what the #1 contributor to ocean pollution is today? It's agriculture. And we just saw about the plastic. That's another big issue. And a note on the plastic pollution. Our company, Nutiva, is a member of the organic, or OSC2. It's a group of companies in the Bay Area, including Guayaquil and Numi and Alter Eco, working on alternative plastics made from plant-based materials, such as cellulose from eucalyptus. One of the challenges, like for instance, we've developed some bags for a chia seed, but they tend to break down, because the idea is you could take the plastic and then put it in the compost bin, but they tend to compost and warp maybe before the final product is finished. So we're still working on that. It's a little on the bleeding edge, but I think there's a lot of potential there. So this is one of my favorite quotes: "The nation that destroys its soils destroys its oceans." Does anyone remember what other person said something similar to this? Franklin Roosevelt said that instead of the nation that destroys its soils destroys its country. And so I kind of hacked the quote and put in oceans. But literally, the oceans is the one piece that we don't seem to be paying attention to enough. And ironically, at the Paris climate talks, soils and oceans, I know this is hard to believe, is not on the agenda for climate change. And this is the two largest carbon sinks in the world. And partly because, we're going to learn a little more about that today, is because of the influence of industrial agriculture and Monsanto and the chemical companies. They don't want people to realize that Roundup and pesticides and herbicides that they're selling and spraying all the foods destroys soils, reduces earthworm populations, and reduces the soil's ability to sequester carbon. But the good news is that things are starting to change, and matter of fact, like the New York Times normally doesn't cover carbon sequestration and its relationship to climate change. Interestingly, like yesterday, there was a report from an op-ed from a gentleman from University of Iowa, and how Iowa farmers could plant cover crops. Right now, I think there's 300,000 acres of cover crops. We could be planting millions of cover crops and do a huge benefit for the environment. So things are starting to change in a positive way. Little about Nutiva. Besides being an organic superfood brand, we also donate 1% of our sales to groups promoting sustainable agriculture, similar to Patagonia. That was one of the companies when I started Nutiva in 1999 that I decided to include that as part of our company DNA. So we've donated over $3 million to date, and here's some of the different categories we donate. We have a goal to see if we can donate $20 million by 2020. Obviously, we got to get our sales keep going fast. And here's some of the examples of the organizations. GMO Inside, which was a group I founded. How many people have been seen any GMO Inside graphics or anything like that? Okay, yeah, we do a lot of campaigns. We put 50,000 comments on General Mills' Facebook wall for Cheerios and got them to go non-GMO for that one SKU, one item. Also, the Rodale Institute and Eco Farm, which I personally started attending Eco Farm maybe 30 years ago and learned a lot about that. So if any of you are really interested in organic farming and food production, I encourage you to go to Eco Farm. It's in Monterey, and they hold it every year. And I'll be speaking several times there on various subjects, including what I'm talking about today. And also on Common Vision, we're planting fruit trees at public schools in the city of Richmond. So we all know there's this big issue around climate change. It's one of the most important issues that we face today. When I grew up in the 1960s, the big issue was air pollution and water pollution, and it was hard for me to breathe when I grew up in Pasadena, California. Luckily, the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act was passed in the early 70s, but that was really important. But today, it's climate change, and we're really seeing a shifting story. Currently, the argument is the planet is getting hotter, right? The icebergs are melting, and this is what you hear pretty much 99% of the message from the media. Planet's getting hotter, and the oil is the problem, and we have to go to solar and wind, right? Is that what you kind of read about? And this is going to be the solution. And that's part of the solution. As a matter of fact, I wrote an article in EcoWatch in September of this year, said that 50% of the climate groups are focused on 50% of the solution to put less stuff into the atmosphere. But the big question is, what are we going to do with the CO2 that's in the atmosphere? How are we going to deal with that? So we got to stop burning more. That's important. But now, what are we going to do with all the material that's in the atmosphere, and that's falling into the ocean? So the oceans are becoming acidic, and why is that a concern? Well, 2/3 of the oxygen on the planet comes from where? Plankton in the oceans. So I like to say we have a new app for that, luckily, and it's called carbon farming. And we can draw down that carbon through regenerative agriculture, through various aspects of agriculture, including pasture systems. So yes, cows are the problem today. The major contributor in agriculture to climate change is industrial agriculture, animal confinement, but they can also be part of the solution in changing how we do that. We definitely need to eat a lot less meat, and if more people became vegetarian, that would be really good. But if you are going to eat meat, there's ways we can do things there. So here's some of the aspects that we can cover crops, compost in terms of regenerative agriculture, and you can maximize diversity is really important, and integrate livestock. So this is a great quote. 2% increase in the carbon content in the planet's soils could offset 100% of all greenhouse gas emissions going in the atmosphere. One of the good news about is the French Minister of Agriculture has confirmed that they're going to have a goal to increase the soil content, carbon content in their soil by 0.4% a year. But one of the things, if we continue on our current path, is we're going to acidify our oceans. And industrial agriculture is killing the sea life because the oceans continue to increase their acidity, and carbon dioxide is the major reason. So as we put it into the soils, we can reduce the impact on the oceans. So this shows you since the last 100 years, we've increased the acidity content by over 30%. So that's a lot. and essentially the coral reefs, et cetera, are starting to go. It's also, you may be aware that 10,000 sea lions unfortunately washed up dead in California beaches in the last year because the oceans are starting to change. And here's an example. Look at this. This green algae bloom is 10 times bigger than the state of California. And this is an example both from El Nino and also the changing conditions of the ocean. And also, I'm going to have to go through this slide really quickly, but notice everywhere it's red. This is a temperature gauge. In one area is blue. That's an area that's starting to change. That's going to impact all weather patterns. People are going to be talking about, we're going to have a Snowmageddon event soon here in the northeast of the United States. And that's getting much cooler from the Greenland melting and changing the currents, and it's going to impact weather all over the planet, something we need to start to be looking at. And we also need to identify what brands are part of the problem. So Starbucks, every time you have a Starbucks latte, you're helping to support destroying the seas, because they would get it from industrial agriculture, from industrial dairy. And so we need to put pressure, because if we could change Starbucks, just like we changed General Mills and Cheerios, then we could change the food system. As long as Starbucks can be a social responsible, supposedly liberal, brand in Seattle, while they have they have whales going nearby their headquarters within 10 to 15 miles. They're destroying their habitats. So we got to change our systems here. And this is a great quote from someone who's involved in the climate movement. Many NGOs view agriculture and carbon as the enemy. The regenerative agriculture movement sees carbon as our friend and agriculture as our natural ally to help carbon return to the land. So the environmental movement and ranchers and farmers can all work together to create a future we want to see, where we can take the carbon and put it back to the soil. That's where it belongs. There's no more carbon or no less carbon today as there was 100 or 1,000 years ago. It's all a matter of balance. So you're interested in learning a little about more of some of the work that I'm doing and the carbon movement. Here's some resources. You can follow me on Facebook. An article I recently wrote, Why Are Climate Groups Only Focus on 50% of the Solution? And I just wrote an article a few days ago in EcoWatch about the Paris climate talks as well. And going away to close, just imagine we can have a healthy ocean. Just imagine that, and it's going to take the concerted effort of all of us and everyone on the planet to step that up. And if not us, who will do it? Thank you.